Hi, I'm Nikki Jones, the Violence Prevention and Survivor Services Coordinator at Able, South Carolina. Thank you for joining me for our fifth and final module in the Bridge to Safety Collaborations training module series. We'll be focusing on accessibility, plain language basics, and tools and resources to create accessible content. So before we get started, a quick note describing the Bridge to Safety collaboration. For those of you who've been with us for the previous 4 modules, you've already heard this. For those of you who might be viewing this one first, just want to share this information before we move on. The Bridge to Safety collaboration is between Able, South Carolina, Pathways to Healing, and YWCA of the Upper Lowlands. This project, funded through the U.S. Department of Justice's Office on Violence Against Women, seeks to create permanent changes within all 3 organizations that result in accessible, safe, and effective services for people with disabilities who have been impacted by interpersonal violence. Together, representatives from all 3 organizations share their expertise and knowledge with each other to build capacity within each organization. On this slide, there's images of all 3 logos for the 3 organizations. Able, South Carolina on the left has our logo is in black text. The lettering reads Able, and then in smaller letters beneath it says South Carolina. On the right is Pathways to Healing, which in light blue and dark blue text reads Pathways to Healing, Advocate, Educate, Support, and has a heart in light blue and dark blue lines. On the bottom, the YWCA's logo is an orange square with black text, which reads Eliminating Racism, Empowering Women, YWCA of the Upper Lowlands. You may be asking, why am I describing the images on the screen? And that's exactly the topic of today's accessibility module. Image descriptions are a form of accessibility that allow people with low vision or people who are blind to appreciate the images on the screen. And you'll hear me doing that throughout this presentation. So the goals of what we're going to cover today: you will learn about why accessibility is important. You'll learn about plain language, how digital accessibility helps with communication access for everyone. We'll also talk about using digital tools, digital accessibility tools, and other tools that will help you increase your digital accessibility. So why is accessibility important? Disability represents the largest and most diverse marginalized community. Disability crosses all social, racial, and cultural groups, and accessible communication benefits everyone. So just how widespread is the need for accessibility? Well, 15.2 million people, that's 6.3% of Americans, have a cognitive, mental, or emotional disability. 8.1 million people, or 3.3% of Americans, have a vision disability. These people might rely on a screen magnifier or a screen reader, or might have a form of color blindness. And 7.6 million people, that's 3.1% of Americans, have a hearing disability. They might rely on transcripts and or captions for audio and video media. So this is a huge chunk of people. And these are our neighbors, these are our coworkers, these are our consumers, these are the people we serve. People with disabilities are everywhere. And in order to truly make our materials accessible, we have to be considering everybody's needs. So let's talk a little bit about the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. The Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in several areas, including employment, transportation, public accommodations, communications, and access to state and local government programs and services. What does that mean? What's covered under the ADA in those areas? So Title I requires employers with 15 or more employees to provide qualified individuals with disabilities an equal opportunity to benefit from the full range of employment-related opportunities available to others. So that's essentially saying that if you're an employer and you have 15 or more employees, you have to provide the same employment-related opportunities to everyone, including your employees with disabilities. Title II covers all activities of state and local governments, regardless of the government entity's size or receipt of federal funding. So this is just saying that no matter what size the state and local government, they have to provide for their citizens, and that includes citizens with disabilities. Title III covers businesses and nonprofit service providers that are public accommodations, privately operated entities offering certain types of courses and examinations, privately operated transportation, and commercial facilities. Title IV addresses telephone and television access for people with hearing and speech disabilities. Title V covers miscellaneous topics. And Section 508 establishes requirements for electronic and information technology developed, maintained, procured, or used by the federal government. Now let's talk about accessible language. So what do we mean when we say plain language? What does that mean? Plain language is just speaking or writing so that as many people as possible can read, understand, and process the information given. A fun fact is that federal entities, meaning anybody who receives federal funding, must use plain language. This was established in the Plain Writing Act of 2010, which requires federal agencies to use, quote, clear government communication that the public can understand and use. And the purpose of this is just to increase access for all citizens to access information and services. If you have important government-related information that you're trying to give out to the public, and only a part of the population can understand it, that's going to be useless for the rest of the population who won't understand it if it's not put in common language, put in plain language. And this established that public issued documents must be written clearly in order to help make information more accessible to the public. So what does plain language do and what does it not do? What it does is put the audience first. It improves writing style, content, organization, and format. So it means that the way we're presenting the information is meant to be easy to understand. It promotes honest and open communication, and it improves services through cleaner forms, documents, letters, and signs. So it's meant to kind of cut through some of the clutter, anything that's unnecessary, simplifying it down so that just the gist of the information is communicated in a way that is accessible and clear. Now, what does it not do? This does not mean that we're making it too simple or that we're taking out content that's essential to the meaning of the communication. We're not losing content. We're not cutting things out that are important. It does not use language that is inappropriate. So when we talk about that plain language should be around a 5th grade reading level, that doesn't mean that we're making content that's appropriate for 5th graders or that we are removing content that would be for adults. We're not talking down to people, and we're not using disrespectful language that insults someone's intelligence or puts them down or others them in any way. And we're not changing important ideas of the content, and we're not using inaccurate, incomplete, or imprecise writing. So all of that is to say, we're trying to make it clear and easy to understand. We're not assuming that the people reading it are incapable of understanding complex ideas or concepts. So what does this all mean? Let's use an example. Let's say we're a government entity and we're coming out with a pamphlet to distribute to people on lead in drinking water. Here's what it sounds like before. Infants and children who drink water containing lead in excess of the action level could experience delays in their physical or mental development. Children could show slight deficits in attention span and learning abilities. Adults who drink this water over many years could develop kidney problems or high blood pressure. Let that sink in for a minute. That's a lot of information. What is it essentially saying? Think about if you saw this in a pamphlet or if you heard it on the radio and maybe you read it one time and you heard it one time, how much of this would you remember? Let's look at the after. So when we talk about arranging the information in a way that's easy to understand, This is an example of how that looks. So lead in drinking water can make you sick. Here are some possible health effects of high lead levels in your drinking water. Children, delayed growth, short attention span. Adults, kidney problems, high blood pressure. So we've simplified this block of text on the left. It still has all the same information. All of the same points are still there, but now it's 2 sentences and 2 bulleted lists. We've conveyed that information very clearly, very directly, and the people reading it are going to be better able to understand what it's saying, better able to remember what it's saying, and better able to, have questions in response or engage with the material. So let's look at some tips for plain language. The first thing is you want to know your audience. One thing about knowing your audience is you should assume that there are people with disabilities in your audience. Even if you personally know the group of people or you have an idea of who you're going to be talking to, you don't want to make assumptions about people. There are disabilities that are considered invisible, meaning that they're not apparent when you look at somebody. So people with cognitive or intellectual or developmental disabilities are going to be a part of your audience, and you want them to be able to understand what you're saying, and you want to be able to put it in an accessible way so that they can engage with the material that you're putting out. You also want to use everyday language. Don't use language that is only going to make sense to somebody in a certain industry. This can be really common for areas where we may have some kind of professional jargon that we're used to using. So think about whether your audience includes professionals or whether it includes lay people. What kind of knowledge of the subject are you assuming they already have? Use personal pronouns like you. Make what you're saying direct. Use an active voice. So what does active voice mean? That means that the subject in the sentence is performing the action, as opposed to passive voice where the subject is receiving the action. So for example, active voice would sound like, you can expect to wait in line for 30 minutes. Whereas passive voice would sound like, wait times of 30 minutes can be expected. So make sure you're using active voice. It's a lot easier to understand. It's a lot easier to remember. And also avoid slang. When we say use everyday language, and of course it depends on your audience and who you're talking to, but don't use words that you're assuming a lot of people are going to know, but it may only be for one specific subgroup of people. Write short sentences that make sense. If what you are saying, if you have a long idea in 3 sentences and it can actually be stated in 1 sentence, state it in 1 sentence. Cut out some of the clutter. Leave out details that may distract your reader. If you have a certain point you're trying to get across, think about if the information that you're including supports that point, or if it is kind of extra information. And think about how much of that extra information is really necessary for you to include. Is there another way you can present that information that doesn't distract so much from the main point you're trying to get across? Or is it unnecessary to include it altogether? You also want to avoid undefined technical words. Like I said before, if there's a lot of technical jargon, professional terms that your audience might not be familiar with, even if you think that they will be familiar with it, it's always good to just at least define the term. If it's a term that is really important for you to use, and it is kind of a technical term, make sure you define it. And if there's any other synonym or something you can use to contextualize that word, to explain that word, be sure to do that. So be direct and not wordy. Use subheadings and heading. Use headings and subheadings, margins and white space to organize the information. So instead of having just a dense brick of text, like you open up the dictionary and it's just a brick, use headings and subheadings and margins and white space bulleted lists, like we saw in the example. Try to organize the information, not just the ideas, but organize it visually. Make it so that when you look at it, you can immediately sort of move through the ideas and see what it's trying to convey in a really easy to understand way. Making the information easy to find. Use words with fewer syllables and keep wording between 3rd and 5th grade. So like I mentioned before, make sure when you're doing this, this doesn't mean to change the ideas or the concepts within the text. It means that using a 3rd to 5th grade reading level, so the types of words that you use, the way the information is presented, all these things that we're talking about. This is talking about readability, not assuming that you're talking to an audience of 5th graders. We never want to talk to our audience of adults as if they are children. So some tips and techniques for writing readable content. Read, test, and edit your content. You want to test your writing to make sure it's easy to understand for your consumers. You can actually test your writing in Word, in Microsoft Word, using just a few clicks. So how do you do that? When you're in Word, go to File and hit Options. Then in the Proofing tab, check the following options. Check grammar with spelling, and then click Show Readability Stats. Then you can click OK and click to review spelling and grammar. Remember that communicating clearly builds understanding and trust within your own networks, as well as the people you serve. The benefits of plain language are that it creates inclusion for a broader audience, that everyone gets information on a level they can understand. And you're explaining larger concepts with understandable content. This is basically just restating what we've already established, and that's that if you are trying to get information out and you want lots of people to understand it, when we have a baseline of everybody, like almost everybody can understand at this level, that means your audience is going to be broader. More people are going to be able to understand your content. And there's going to be less people left out who may really need access to that content. So where can you apply plain language? Just about everywhere. Everything from job postings and descriptions to presentations, meeting notes and agendas. Think about how useful it is to have a bulleted list as an agenda. It's easy to move through. You have a clear chronology of what's going to happen next. And that can really help people set up for a meeting. So we're not only talking about public-facing materials, we're also talking about interagency materials. And this applies to websites and social media as well. Anything that's going to be online representing your organization, event pages. If your organization has an event coming up and they're trying to advertise it, making sure that your website and social media are using plain language, and also that they themselves are accessible, which we're going to get into a little bit later. Internal communication, and flyers and other promotional materials. All of these benefit from using plain language to make it accessible to a broader audience. So let's talk about making accessible documents. What are some things to consider about making documents accessible? So screen readers translate written content into audible content. And when we talk about making documents accessible, one big factor is thinking about how readers who use screen readers, so readers who are blind or have low vision, are going to be able to take in that information using their screen reader. We also want to consider that accessibility features are built into programs you already use, like Word, PowerPoint, and Adobe Acrobat. These all have accessibility features already built in. You just have to follow the instructions under the accessibility checker for each program. So this, if you're thinking, oh, I don't know how to do this, this seems so hard, I've never considered accessibility in my documents before, a lot of this work can be done for you using these tools that already exist. And they're actually pretty easy to use. So let's talk a little bit more about accessible online communication. Why is this important? Of course, just like before, because we want to reach a larger audience. And we also want to show, you want to show your responsibility to inclusion. You may think, oh, well, only a couple of people are going to need this. Is it really that important? It is that important, not just because they are important and need to be included in the information, but it also demonstrates your responsibility to inclusion. It demonstrates that a value that you hold or that your organization holds is that everybody deserves access to this information and that it's critical that everybody does have access to this information. And that's important. Another reason is that accessibility benefits everyone, like closed captioning. Lots and lots of people, regardless of whether they identify as having a disability, like tools like captions. It helps people, people learn in lots of different ways. People take in information in lots of different ways. And when we give people multiple options, like closed captioning, it means that the information is more accessible for people with disabilities and people without disabilities. And last, accessibility is the law. We mentioned the ADA. So accessibility is a requirement by law. Let's go over some basics of online accessibility. So what we're going to go over, we're going to talk about alt text and image descriptions. We're going to talk about open and closed captions, color contrast, and a few other miscellaneous things, emojis, hashtag usage, and a little bit more about plain language. If some of these terms are unfamiliar to you, don't worry, we're going to get into more detail. So let's talk about the purpose of alt text and explain a little bit about why and how we use it. So the purpose is to provide descriptions of visual content and information for people who are blind or have low vision. And this must be used for photos, graphics, and GIFs, which are like little short animated clips. And there's a difference between image descriptions versus alt text. Alt text is shorter and it's coded directly into the image so that it can be read out loud by a screen reader. This is not going to be visible to someone who's a sighted reader who's only using vision to take in the information. An image description is longer and it's included in the post or in the content itself. It's visible to sighted users as well as read out loud by a screen reader by users who are blind or have low vision. So what's the difference when we're using alt text and image descriptions? How do they look and sound and how are they different? So alt text is meant to be a short description. You don't want to use more than maybe 125 characters max. It's meant to be brief and just a little snapshot of what's conveyed in the photo. So when you write the alt text, you want to think about, A, what's the purpose of the photo? Why is it included? What should the reader be noticing about the photo? And this can vary according to what you're trying to convey. So you may want to think about how you are tying it into the information that you are trying to convey. So an example of alt text for this image, a close-up of two young Black disabled people smiling and holding hands in front of a tan backdrop. This is about 78 characters. So you could write a little more. You could add another sentence of context, maybe tying it into why the photo is included. But you want to keep it around 125 characters or less. You want to keep it pretty short. The image description should include more information about the photo. And keep in mind also that for people who are using screen readers, they're going to get both. So you don't want to repeat the exact same information twice. You want the image description to have more depth, more context, more information. So with this image description that we could put in the caption underneath, close-up of two young disabled Black friends smiling and holding hands in natural light in front of a tan curtain. So we're describing the background, we're describing what's in the foreground, we're describing sort of the setting, you know, are they outside? Are they inside? One friend stands behind the other, who is seated in a power wheelchair. The woman in back has long natural hair, glasses, dark lipstick, and is wearing fingerless compression gloves. Her non-binary friend in front of her has short natural hair, a black and gray sweater, and red lipstick. So now we have a ton of information about not just what's going on in this photo, but who these folks are. We've included information that we know about their identities. We've included information about the different colors and details of what they're wearing, how they're positioned, what their relationship is to each other. So we're giving a lot more information in the image description versus the alt text. So now you give it a try. I'm going to allow about 30 seconds. Think about an image description and an alt text you could attach to this photo if you were, say, posting it on social media. Think about the context of the photo. Think about anything you might recognize in the photo that you'd want readers to notice. And if you need to pause the video and maybe write it down, you can feel free to do that. So now I'm going to move on to give you some examples of what this could look like to compare yours to. So an image description is going to be obviously a lot longer. The alt text, we'll start with this. So a lamppost with a Disability Pride SC banner on it against a cloudy sky. The dome of the SC State House is visible through treetops in the background. So encapsulating all the basic information of this photo, but not giving a whole lot more detail. We know that we're outside. We know that there's a Disability Pride SC banner. We know there's a lamppost in the foreground and the SC State House in the background. The image description reads, a dark green lamppost with a banner on it that has an illustration of 4 diverse people with different disabilities. At the top, it says Able, South Carolina in dark lettering. And at the bottom, it says Disability Pride SC in different shades of blue lettering. In the distance behind the lamppost, the copper dome of the SC State House is visible from behind green treetops. So now we've got a tapestry of information. We've got a lot of details. We've got that the dome is made of copper. We've got the images portrayed on the banner. We've got the colors of the letters. We've got all kinds of information that give us more context and detail about the photo. So now that we've talked about images, let's move on and talk a little bit about captioning. So captioning refers to video files, right? The purpose is to provide live transcription of any spoken word in a video. And this is for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. And many people who are not deaf use this too. Captioning your videos increases engagement on social media. So think about just the vast amount of people who use and enjoy captions, disabled people and non-disabled people. So we have deaf and hard of hearing folks who rely on captions. In many cases, if there's not ASL interpreting, or if they don't speak ASL, to get the information from the video. But there's also folks who maybe process information differently. Maybe reading the text is a lot easier than just listening to it. Maybe the person is talking really fast and it's hard for people to understand what they're saying. Maybe someone's viewing this on their phone and they're somewhere where they can't have the volume on. So they're just reading the captions instead of listening to it out loud. That's just some of the many reasons why captioning your videos actually increases engagement online. And keep in mind though that captioning must be used in all videos, both live and uploaded. So this doesn't just apply to pre-made content that you're uploading, it also applies to live content. So think about if you're filming an event, if you are having a live interview with somebody. And we're going to go over a little bit about open versus closed captions and talk about all the different options you have. There's many different programs and services available to assist you with captioning. or you can do it yourself. Kapwing is one of these services, and they allow up to 7-minute videos for free. So definitely check that out. Auto-generate is a great tool, but you also need to keep in mind that you're going to need to review the captions before publishing. There can be some really embarrassing typos that might come up that the auto captions generate that is not what you meant to say at all, or it can sometimes leave out really important information. Sometimes just a word being switched can kind of undermine the whole point of what you're trying to say, and you don't want to leave people out who are relying on captions as the primary way that they're getting the information. So send your video out to get captioned. This is another option that's really good for large video files. And Rev is one of those ways those files can be formatted. So you can also get the SRT transcript back and upload it to video editing software or social platform of choice. And an SRT file is just a type of file, and it's used for adding captions to videos after you make it. So how do you add closed captioning? You can upload subtitles yourself, or you can have them auto-generated and then click Edit in Classic Studio to finish up in the subtitles. And this image on the screen is just what it looks like if you go on YouTube and you want to have those auto-generated captions. So you go in, and then here in the center of the screen, you see the drop-down list that says Edit in Classic Studio. So it just makes it so that you can review the auto-generated subtitles and then make any minor edits or changes yourself manually. But it takes out a lot. It cuts down on the time it takes to do this, and it takes out a lot of the work so that you just have to go in and change a few minor things before you upload it. And then boom, you've got accurate captions. But what about live captioning? If you're doing a live video, like on Facebook or YouTube, or an online event like Zoom, say you're doing a webinar, it's best to add live captioning. So there's a couple ways you can do this. There's auto-generated captions, which are better than nothing, but they're going to have flaws, especially if people are talking fast, if they're using terms that may not be commonly used. There may be some mistakes in the auto captioning that can be confusing for anybody who's watching, who's relying on the captions to convey the information, and kind of just have to shrug their shoulders. Paid captioners will have a lot more accuracy. So for auto captioning, if you're in Zoom, you can go to Live Transcript and then hit Enable Auto Transcription. And here's an image of what that looks like. So we've got the menu here. It says assign someone to type. So you can assign a participant to actually type out the captions, or you can use a third-party CC service. And then on the bottom here, it says live transcript, enable auto transcription, and then click the box to allow participants to request live transcription. All right, now let's move on to diversity and inclusion. Inclusion of individuals with disabilities in planning and presenting. So just like we've been talking about this whole time about considering our audience, assume that you have audience members with disabilities, and assume that there's a broad range of disabilities. There's visual, hearing, cognitive, intellectual, developmental disabilities. We want to be keeping in mind all the different ways that people are going to be taking in information and processing information and interacting with the information. By providing accessible content, you not only reach a disabled audience, but you also make information more useful to more people. So of course, it's important to convey that you value disability access. And also consider, like for example, with the captions, there are non-disabled people who are going to benefit from these features too. And whether you receive federal funding and you're required by law to make your digital media accessible, or whether you are just a business trying to get customers, you have to consider all the different people who you're talking to and what they need in order to access that information. So it's just some closing thoughts. Talk with organizations run by people with disabilities to make sure your building, your documents, and your website are all accessible. But don't feel like there's a finish line that you've got to run to immediately and then you never have to think about it again. Accessibility is an ongoing process. So just like with section 508 of the ADA, some of these digital forms of communication didn't exist when the ADA was originally made. It had to be added in. So as technology continues to develop, as your organization grows and changes, you want to make sure that accessibility is just an ongoing thing that you check in with, that you're asking for feedback from the people who, from your customers, from your consumers, from the people who are maybe in the public that is interacting with your organization and your services, getting feedback from them, getting feedback from staff and employees, and then incorporating that. In addition to talking with organizations run by people with disabilities who have expertise in some things. We all have times where we don't know what we don't know. And especially even among people with disabilities, just because you have one experience or one understanding of disability, or one experience of, well, this is what it means to accommodate this certain experience that I'm familiar with. There's lots of other experiences that you may not be familiar with. And if you don't have personal experience with something, sometimes it can be hard to know what you're missing. And that's why it's so important to consult with people with disabilities about what they need. Planning ahead makes the process easier for everyone. So this goes without saying. If you're planning an event and you want to make it accessible and you don't think about it until a week before the event, you're going to be scrambling, trying to find an ASL interpreter, trying to figure out somebody to do captions for you, trying to make sure there's curb cuts in the sidewalk on the day of the event. All of this stuff is much better done planned in advance. And then having those allies, having those people you can call on to say, hey, I need a second opinion on some accessibility things. Can you help me out with this? You don't need to reinvent the wheel when you have people you can consult. So a disclaimer, this project was supported by grant number 2017 FWAXK001, awarded by the Office on Violence Against Women, U.S. Department of Justice. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this publication, program, exhibition are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Justice, Office on Violence Against Women. And I hope you stuck around after that disclaimer because there are some great resources here. We've got plain language resources we're giving you. We've got federal plain language information. And we've got this link to the Center for Plain Language, which is a national organization dedicated to promoting plain language. So if you still have questions about plain language, or it kind of makes sense, but you've never done it before and you're a little nervous about practicing it, check out some of these. They make it really easy to understand. They give you lots of examples and tips for writing in plain language. There's also a link here to the ADA requirements on effective communication. Definitely check that out and be aware of what those requirements are. And we've got this link to the Noun Project, which has lots and lots of icons and photos for making content easier to read and understand, to be able to illustrate some of the ideas that you are conveying. And then there's Rewordify. I love this site. Definitely check this out. This is a site that gives suggestions for plain language. So you can literally put in a block of text and it will tell you, here's a suggestion for how you could make this plain language. It's pretty awesome. So that's all for now. Thank you so much for joining us for this accessibility module. Have a wonderful day.